I want to make it very clear that I want to talk to the committee today about Bill C-9, and which, if passed with Amendment BQ3 alone, would strip away long-standing protections for freedom of expression and religious liberty in this country. You know, this goes directly to supporting the amendment by my colleague Andrew Lawton in this latest amendment. This bill represents the most significant assault on Canadians' ability to speak openly about their faith, perhaps since the Charter was written. And it comes in an especially telling moment. And I can't tell if this is ironic or disturbing or deliberate or accidental. But during the Advent season, and at a time when Christians reflect on Scripture, hope, and the coming of Christ, we've witnessed the astonishing spectacle of the previous Liberal Justice Committee chair declaring that parts of the Bible and the Torah contain clear hatred. He singled out Leviticus, Deuteronomy, and Romans, and that is not a random commentator. That was the individual responsible for overseeing the Justice Committee, and just last week he was promoted to Cabinet as the Minister responsible for Canadian identity and culture. Only this Liberal government would reward someone for asserting, essentially, that God himself is hateful. I would encourage the new minister to revisit the preamble of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which affirms that Canada is founded upon principles recognizing the supremacy of God and the rule of law, as well as our national anthem, that God keep our land glorious and free. The Liberal government frequently boasts about defending the Charter, yet they conveniently ignore the Charter's protections for freedom of religion and expression, as well as its own explicit acknowledgement of God in the preamble and the national anthem. This hypocrisy is the backdrop of everything in Bill C-9. At the center of this bill is a political deal between the Liberals and the Bloc Québécois. In exchange for the Bloc's support, the Liberals have agreed to eliminate long-standing criminal code safeguards, namely sections 3193B, 319.3.1b, that protect Canadians from being prosecuted for, in good faith, expressing an argument on a religious subject or a belief rooted in sacred text. These protections are not loopholes. They are constitutional guardrails upheld by the Supreme Court and ensuring that Canada's hate speech provisions remain consistent within the Charter. My colleagues before me have gone to great lengths and with great eloquence, far more eloquence than I could muster, to express this point quite poignantly. But the Liberals and the Bloc want to tear these protections out by the roots. The Bloc justifies this change by referencing a single case. Montreal Imam Adil Shakouri Imam, who in 2023 used a prayer to call for the extermination of Jews. This is abhorrent. His statements were vile and deeply anti-Semitic. But the simple truth is that what he said was already illegal. Illegal under Section 318 for advocating genocide and under 3191 for public incitement of hatred. This is another example of the government failing to act and failing to execute on laws that already exist on the books in the protection of Canadians and their fundamental rights. The religious text defense does not apply to either provision, and there is absolutely no evidence prosecutors declined to charge him because of that defense. The only reason he was not charged is because authorities failed to enforce the law. This is unbelievable. Instead of fixing that enforcement gap, the Liberals and the Bloc have chosen to target law-abiding religious Canadians. That is hypocrisy of the highest order, especially as they claim this bill is meant to protect the very communities it would most deeply wound. For nearly a decade, this government has repeatedly marginalized Canadians of faith. They've attempted to strip charitable status from religious charities and pro-life organizations. They imposed the Canada Summer Jobs Values Test, punishing groups that refuse to renounce their core religious beliefs. And this is unbelievable and unconscionable. I will note that this ideological overreach is not new. In fact, in an early 2022 report from an advisory panel to the Department of National Defence recommended that Canadian Armed Forces not employ chaplains whose religious traditions do not align with the government's ever-shifting vision of equality and inclusion. And this panel singled out the entire Abrahamic faith traditions. Those traditions that reserve priesthood for men, and those that believe in the traditional view of marriage as being incompatible with serving in the military. Think about that. Think, really, we need as legislators to think about this. That a government that claims to champion diversity and inclusion was actively entertaining the exclusion of religious Canadians from serving as chaplains precisely because of their beliefs. Shameful. This is not tolerance, it is blatant liberal double standard. Diversity is celebrated only when it mirrors the government's ideology, and the Charter of Rights millions of Canadians are dismissed as an inconvenience. Now, Bill C-9 directly targets their freedom of expression. Yet the Liberals still claim to be the party of the Charter, even as they systematically attack the very freedoms the Charter guarantees. Witnesses who appeared before Justice Committee debunked the Liberals' claim entirely. Numerous constitutional experts explained that the religious text defense is narrow, specific, and constitutionally necessary. It is not a blanket protection. It applies only to good faith expressions of sincerely held religious belief, not to violence, not to incitement, not to hatred. The courts have been clear on this point for decades. But Liberals now believe they know better than the constitutional jurisprudence and better than every witness who testified before them. Their ideological agenda matters more than evidence or constitutional balance. If C-9 passes, the consequences will be severe. And I have a question for Liberal and Bloc members of this committee. Would a priest reading the scheduled Sunday Mass, a reading set years in advance, face persecution or prosecution if the passage is deemed offensive? No. Would a rabbi teaching Torah commentary, a Muslim parent quoting the Quran to explain moral teaching, could a Sikh, a Hindu, or a Buddhist teachers be targeted simply for articulating traditional beliefs? No. Any person of faith quoting their sacred text could face up to 2 years in prison if the government or a prosecutor finds their belief objectionable. In a country like Canada, home to such rich religious diversity, this is chilling. A free society debates and engages. It does not imprison people for sincerely held religious convictions. The Liberals insist their bill protects religious Canadians from hate, while simultaneously displaying a deep disdain for religious communities who express views different from their own, and this contradiction is staggering. Let us also remember the historical context the Liberals prefer to ignore. It was a Conservative government led by John Diefenbaker that first enshrined these fundamental freedoms into Canadian law through the Bill of Rights. The very criminal code the Liberals are rewriting was drafted by Sir John Thompson, a devout Catholic and Conservative Prime Minister who understood that criminal law must restrain real harm, not police belief or censor sacred texts. He even initially declined to become Prime Minister due to the intense sectarian hatred of his time after converting to the Catholic faith. But today's Liberals lecture Canadians about rights while gutting the rights that Conservatives and historically even Liberals worked hard to establish and protect. Removing the religious expression safeguard in Section 319 will not make Canadians safer. It will not stop real hate. Genuine incitement and advocacy of genocide are already illegal, will remain illegal, and must be prosecuted by the system that already exists. This bill will succeed in one area, though. It will expose millions of peaceful, law-abiding people of faith to criminal prosecution simply for quoting scripture or expressing long-held religious convictions. This is chilling. That is not who Canada is supposed to be. It is not constitutional, it is not just, and it is not worthy of a free society. I urge every member of this committee to accept the amendment from my learned colleague and defend the freedoms of religion, expression, and conscience that form the foundation of our democracy. The Liberals may have forgotten these principles, but Canadians haven't. And I have one question for the witnesses. That if passed in this restrictive form right now, the government has made, and the government side and the Liberals and the Bloc have made great statements to the fact that it doesn't matter, right, that the charter exists, that there won't be prosecutions. But could the government use the notwithstanding clause to maintain enforcement, even though we have been assured that we need not worry about this infringement because of freedoms found in the charter? And I would love to hear a comment from all three of you.
Thank you for the question, Chair. So I can speak generally to the requirements of Section 33 of the Charter, which is that a declaration, if made, must be done expressly by the legislature under this section in order to have the effect that such operation of the charter rights would not apply but for, that the declaration must be done expressly would apply for only sections 7 to 15 of the charter, and would apply only for 5 years. So it's my understanding that the federal government has never invoked the notwithstanding clause, but those are the requirements of form in terms of the declaration needing to be specific by the legislature.
I don't have anything to add to what my colleague Ms. Ali has said on the scope of Section 33 of the Charter. I don't know if there was another question.
So it was the same question. All witnesses, that could the notwithstanding clause be used to defend C9 in its current form prior to the amendment from my colleague across the way, if it was struck down by the court?
I think what I can say is that there's nothing in the bill as introduced that suggests that the government intended to invoke Section 33 of the Charter.
I understand that. But if this is enacted and proclaimed, and then subsequently found to be not constitutional by the court, could the government use the notwithstanding clause to maintain enforcement?
We're here to speak tonight about what is in C9 and the impact of the amendments that are before the committee, but not to opine on what would happen, what the government might do in a situation where a law is struck down. That is not the role of a Justice Department official. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. At least I got you speaking, right? So I appreciate that. I want to close a little bit with some commentary that I've been contacted by numerous faith leaders in my riding over the previous few days. And I find it very hard to express how deeply afraid they are of where this might go and what this portends for their faith, for their traditions, and for their how the chilling effect has fallen on top of them at the beginning of the Christmas season. And so I want all members to think very deeply into their souls on what this portends. And with that, Chair, I cede my time.